friends, welcome back to Karla Created. I'm Karla, and in today's video I'm going to be making another scrappy quilt. Yes, you heard correctly. I'm making another scrappy quilt. Let's get into it. Okay, technically this quilt is like half scrappy but also half using up my fabric stash. But I'm just going to call it a scrappy quilt because a lot of the fabrics have been sitting in my cupboard, my fabric stash cupboard, for that long that you could technically call them like scraps or the forgotten fabrics. Let's go with the forgotten fabrics, shall we? Now, I don't like wasting things. I don't like throwing stuff out. I could donate a lot of my fabric that I don't want to the thrift store, and I have done that a couple of times over the years, but it's really hard for me to do that because I just see so much potential in fabric. I just love textiles. Something about it just gets me going. Anyway, I went through all of my fabric stash as well as all of my cotton fabric scraps, and there was quite a lot. Like, let's be real, I am a bit of a hoarder when it comes to this stuff. And I picked out some really gorgeous fabrics, a lovely combination with a really nice balance in value to get a nice contrast on my scrappy quilt. And I'm going to show you my process from start to finish, including the end product, obviously. Who even am I at the moment? I think I need another coffee. Anyway, I'm going to share with you the whole process that I went through and the different methods that I used to create my scrappy blocks and talk you through the whole thing because, yeah, I think it's such a great way to use up fabric scraps but also use up a lot of the fabrics in your stash. And I just like the method of scrappy quilting and piecing things together randomly. It's way more interesting, for me at least. So if you're like me and you don't want to make things on repeat endlessly, like the same block again and again and again, you want a little bit of creativity and diversity, then stay with me and I will show you how I achieve that through my scrappy quilt that I am about to make. All right. That was really long-winded. Anyway, if you've seen my other videos, you'll understand. It's just the old tinker. It's how it is. Let's do it. Here's some of the fabrics that I have chosen for this project. I've got this amazing rust color solid, as well as this gray linen. Now, there's a really funny story behind how I acquired this, but maybe I'll share that later if I get time in this video. This is an old curtain that actually has this really cute, like floral sort of texture to it. And then I've also got this other floral here as well. I also picked out a few other fabrics from my stash as well as some scraps, which you'll see later in the video. Now what I'm doing next is just cutting out 8.5-inch squares. I'm doing this in layers, so I've actually layered a number of fabrics on top of each other. Now this method helps create random scrappy blocks really, really quickly. And I got the idea from Karen Brown at Just Get It Done Quilts. I'll link this specific video in the description box below, and I encourage you to go and check it out because it is such a fantastic video. I swear I've learned so much about quilting from Karen Brown, and I suppose that's her whole channel's purpose. So if you want to sort of understand more about what I'm doing, please go check that video out. I'm not affiliated with her in any way, but that video has helped me so much in understanding a lot of quilting techniques. So you'll see here that I am cutting out squares to develop some scrappy blocks. Now in this next clip, you'll see that I've actually gone ahead and started piecing blocks together in a really random way. I'm layering them once again on top of one another, and you'll see me cut right through the middle. Now this is to create, in the same method that I've just explained from Just Get It Done Quilts, the scrappy sort of mismatched blocks really quickly. And I chose to do this method for a part of the quilt because I had some larger pieces of fabric from my stash that I thought would work great for this technique and help me build up the quilt blocks really rapidly. I do move on to more of a scrappy, I guess,
English paper piecing type method. I mean, I don't even know if that's correct, but you'll see me do a different technique later in the video, so stay tuned for that. Okay, I've used up most of the larger pieces of fabric, and this is what I've got left to work with. A little basket of scraps. I've got some bigger pieces here that you can see, which are actually old pockets and things, random shapes and sizes. So I've separated the fabric into different sized piles. So this is sort of my medium pile. I then have a slightly larger pile, and you'll see here that I've aligned the color values as well, so then I can make blocks that are sort of somewhat coordinated. And then I've got the bigger pieces, or the biggest sort of bits of fabric left. Here's what I thought was footage of me showing you the blocks that I'd made, but then I realized now that I'm watching it, it's me trying to get a good thumbnail photo. Anyway. Okay, so I have cleaned off my desk here to finish off making all of the rest of the blocks. So this is what I've got left. I've got this little tray here full of really small sort of crumb scraps. Some of them are quite oddly shaped, you know, like little triangular pieces. So I'm keeping these to fill in some of the gaps with some of the other bigger scraps that I'm stitching together to make a block. I then have a very small pile now of slightly bigger scrap pieces, still not very big, but bigger than the crumbs in that little basket tray there. You'll see that I'm running out of some of the floral printed fabric as well, with the exception of this lot here, which I have quite a bit of, but I'm saving this in the hope that I can potentially use it as the backing piece for the quilt or the binding. So we will see. I might actually use a sheet to be the backing of the quilt, maybe, depending on the finished size. I also have some bigger pieces here and here, which I'm turning into blocks still. And here's what I'm doing with all of these scrappy pieces. I'm joining them together, and we're at the stage now with the remaining scraps that I'm getting some interesting sort of funky shapes happening here. And then I'm creating fabric basically, and then cutting the fabric down to size and then adding pieces to it. I'm taking sort of batches to my ironing board as I sort of do a chain piecing, and then see, that's just quite a scrappy piece. Little bits here. This one's quite cute. And then when I've got big enough pieces, then I'm sitting down and working out how I can attach them together like that. That'll become a block there. So that's what I'm doing. It's really fun. Actually, this whole project so far has been incredibly enjoyable. I mean, my last patchwork quilt project, which if I haven't already linked it by now, I'll link it here in this video, was just as enjoyable. I really like making quilt blocks with scraps because it just brings more creativity into it, and I just get more joy and satisfaction from doing it this way rather than making the same block with the same fabric on repeat. So that's just me. Blame it on the neurodivergence maybe, but this is really my jam. So let me share with you the stack of blocks that I have made so far. This is my most recent finished one. You'll see here how unique it is, and it's very scrappy. Oh, this one on the bottom is also very scrappy. So once I've finished using up and making as many blocks as I can out of this remaining fabric that I've just shared with you here, I will sit down and start designing my quilt on the floor, because I don't have one of those design board walls, unfortunately. But I will start placing all of these blocks down on the floor and figuring out the design of this quilt. This quilt I'm making for my sister, and by the time this video comes out, I will have already gifted it to her, and I might even include a snip of her reaction in the video if she allows me to. So it's really, really special. Yes, it's scrappy. It's going to be very, very unique, but it's a very, very special quilt for her. And I hope she likes it. I'm sure she will. And I'm so excited to get it finished and to give it to her and see what she thinks. So yes. All right. Well, I'm going to keep at it with my chain piecing and my scrappy block making. And yeah, let's keep going.
All right, I'm done. I have used up all of the fabric with the exception of this tiny little tray of very, very small pieces that I for some reason have kept. Like, what am I going to do with that? I mean, I have an idea, which is why I've kept them. But we'll come to that later if I've got time. Let's not get distracted, Karla. Keep with one project at a time. So all the other fabric I have used, and here are all the blocks done. I've counted and I have 88, which means that I can get an 8 by 11, so 8 blocks by 11 blocks, which would equate to 88, obviously. Sized quilt, so whatever that works out to. When I initially did the math based on the size of wadding I have, because this I've already cut into for the previous quilt that I made, and I have a bit, it's probably like a half a queen size quilt in here, I guess. 52 inches by 82 inches was the size that I measured that I have in terms of the wadding. That worked out to be 104 blocks, but I have not had enough fabric to make 104 blocks, so I've made 88. So we're just going to go with that size, and it's going to be a lap quilt anyway. It's not going to be like the kind of quilt that you would put over a whole bed. I'm thinking she could probably put it like at the end of her bed maybe, or use it on the lounge. So I'm going to start laying these out on the floor and having some fun playing with designs. Yeah, so let's get into that. Apologies for this appearance. This is what you call when you need to wash your hair. Yep, and scrub your face. It's great. Okay, here goes. When designing a quilt on the floor, it is important to take rest breaks so then you don't get a sore back and neck. Just a public service announcement right there. Now, the method I used to design all of the blocks was making sure that I had the right value of color evenly dispersed across the scrappy quilt. So this was mainly those reds, that rusty color that you see, and any other darker, bold color. They tend to stand out and they can create really good contrast if they're distributed nicely across a quilt.
So I was really conscientious of this. I placed everything out and I did move a lot of the blocks around to make sure that I had an even balance of contrast and value across the quilt. I even took a few black and white photos, which is a tip that I once again saw on Just Get It Done Quilts. At this point, I now sound like I'm just spruiking her channel, but anyway. The black and white photo helps you see where there's an imbalance in color value. So I did that a couple of times and moved a few blocks around just to make sure that I had that even distribution of value between light and dark. And I'm really happy with the end result. The hardest part of this whole process is once you've got the design in place, is keeping the design in order when you stitch every row together. I honestly cannot wrap my head around it, and I made a few errors. Luckily, I had the photos to go back to, but my golly, that was really, really difficult. Maybe if I had a design wall, it would be much easier because I could actually leave the quilt up on the wall, and then it would just be much easier, I'm guessing, rather than having to pick everything up and try and keep it all in order and then stitch it all together in different sessions, because none of my sewing happens in one day. Like, this is like weeks of sewing sessions because, you know, life happens. So anyway, I'm rambling now and the footage has turned into just nothing because I've talked for too long. Let's cut to some future footage of where the quilt's at.
Good morning. It is, I don't even know, like 6:30 in the morning and everyone's still asleep. And this is when I have my quiet sewing time for work. So apologies for, once again, all of the effort that I've put into my appearance this morning. I'm in my pajamas. I have just sewn row number 1 together. I'm hoping that I've got all of the blocks in the right orientation. I sort of stacked each row up and numbered each row. And I just need to be really careful when I stitch them together to make sure that I'm not like turning any of the blocks around, because otherwise I'll get the wrong kind of design. Anyway, row number 1 is done. So I might, my coffee here in my awesome handmade mug that I didn't make, but I would love to learn pottery one day. Stay tuned for that eventually. When I've got more time, damn jobs. Anyway, I'm going to have my coffee and continue sewing these blocks together before I have to get ready for work and take the kids off to school and daycare. So yeah, I hope you're all having a fantastic morning wherever you are in the world, or a fantastic day whatever time you're watching this. Cheers.
The quilt block is done and it's amazing. I am so happy with it. It took a little while, a few different sewing sessions, but I got it done. I also decided to use this plain sheet instead of the floral fabric for the quilt backing. Okay, we're almost done, folks. You'll see here that I've made the quilt sandwich. Now I have pinned three layers together, and I'm standing here at the moment contemplating what kind of quilting design I am going to do. So what I do decide to do, you'll see me start drawing it out, is like a curve that cuts across the quilt. And then I'm going to use my I guess, what's it called? My quilting guide on my sewing machine to do evenly spaced curves away from this main curve that I'm doing right down the middle. I hope that makes sense. What it results in is this beautiful sort of wavy quilt pattern design across the quilt, which I think is just lovely. It's also really simple to do. Hot tip though is don't do your initial curve too curvy. How many times can I say curve in one go? If you do the curve too curvy, so do it more like a longer sort of stretched out kind of curve, because if it's too curvy and the corners are too sharp on that initial curve, it gets sharper and sharper in the corners, the extra rows of quilting that you do. Obviously, I'm not an expert in explaining all of this, so I hope you're following along. But look, if you're not, just do straight lines. Okay.
Created the quilt sandwich and I have started quilting. Now I've decided to go for a wave design, just because I thought that would be the best thing. And I have attached my my quilting guide to help me create relatively even gaps between each of my quilting stitches, and it's looking really good so far. Gosh, it's a long job though, and it's kind of challenging, I'm not gonna lie, because I'm just using my lovely Benina, and which is just a domestic machine, and getting all of the quilt through the gap plus keeping it even has been a little bit difficult. So yeah, stick with me while I finish this off, and then I'll show you how I'm going to bind it, because I'm doing a different kind of method to bind this quilt. I was going to use this floral fabric as like the binding, but I just feel like it's too busy. But I've used a sheet as the backing of the quilt, and I'm going to use that same fabric to bind it, but I'll show you how I'm going to do that in a moment, because yeah, this looks really great with the backing from the back, but then from the front I just feel like it will be too busy with the quilt top. I want the quilt top to be the hero. So I'll show you once I get to that point, but let's get these last few quilting rows done. Can you see all of those amazing wavy lines? Let me get a little bit closer. How cool is that? Okay, so what am I going to do for the binding, you ask? Well, you may have noticed that I have cut quite a bit of extra backing fabric around the quilt top, and that is because I'm going to try the technique whereby you fold that excess backing fabric over to the front and then top stitch it down. I think that's a technique. If not, then I'm just making it up. I thought about this long and hard last night in bed, and I'm pretty sure I dreamt about it because I wasn't sure if this was a good decision or whether I should go back to that floral fabric as the binding. But then I woke up this morning and I was like, nope, just stick with the plan, Karla, because you've already pinned it all together and you've made the quilt sandwich. Quilt it today and just get it done, because you're running out of time. And also I think it's going to look really good having this pale grey as the border from the front, because really my sister's gonna have the colourful bit on display most of the time, I'm pretty sure. I mean, she hopefully will love it. I say that, but there's always that little skerrick of doubt that she might be like, this is wild and insane, and nah, she's gonna love it, because there's a chicken patch. Who is not gonna love the crazy chicken patch? Like, come on. Yeah, I mean, there is a fair amount of florally kind of fabric on here, but I think it's balanced by the lovely rusty red and the other tonal colors. So yeah, she's gonna love it. She's gonna love it just because I made it for her. Here is what I mean. So see how I have the quilt top finishing here. I then have this excess piece of wadding. Now the reason why I have this and I didn't just cut the wadding down is because the piece of wadding that I had was literally this exact size, and there's the same sort of width on the other side of, well, all the way around I should say, around the quilt top. And I just thought, well, why cut this piece off and waste it when I can just maximize it and you know, include it in the quilt, so then the quilt's a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to be doing is essentially folding this excess over like that and then top stitching it here. I'm going to be doing that all the way around, obviously. What I do need to do first is just trim down this so that it's all evenly sized, this width all the way around the quilt, because there is some spots that are just a little bit wider than others, because obviously when I cut it down I was just like, woo. So yeah, I'm going to do that, and then I might also just need to trim down some of this excess so that it's not too much. Okay, so you can see here that I have got, this is about 2 inches and this is 5 inches, and I have cut all the way around to make sure it's nice and even. It was pretty close, but now it's much closer. And all I'm going to do is fold this and then fold it like that and then top stitch.
And here is the finished quilt. It looks awesome. I am so incredibly pleased with how it turned out. If you've enjoyed watching this video, it would mean the world to me if you give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. I love sewing. I do a lot of sewing projects, including quilts and clothing, but I also really enjoy other DIY projects as well. You're probably wondering whether my sister liked it or not, and needless to say, of course she did.